One, two, three. Three count four.
Hello everyone, I am Be Better Gamer, and welcome to Be Better Gamer Wrestling. This channel is dedicated to wrestling games fueled by my love, passion, and obsession for them. I am playing WWF No Mercy. I am finally bringing you the last chapter in my WWF No Mercy Let's Play series for the Women's Championship. Gonna complete the Women's Championship. It's the shortest path. It shouldn't have taken me this long, but I've been busy with so many things behind the scenes, working on my channel, working on Twitch, which you can find me at twitch.tv/BeBetterGamer. And I will be playing to close out this Women's Championship path, none other than Jacqueline. Miss Jackie, if you will. Some people like to call her Jacqueline, former two-time WWE Women's Champion, inducted into WWE Hall of Fame, class of 2016, and I'm actually using an edited version of Jacqueline. As you can see here, I did a Let's Play previously with Ivory, and Ivory and Jacqueline share a slot. They just basically alternate their outfits and like picture and profile, but the move sets are the same between them. And I've talked about over the course of this Women's Championship Let's Play that a lot of the women in the game, their moves need to be enhanced. You know, their move sets are kind of all over the place, not really reflective and accurate of what they did when they actually wrestled. So I decided, you know what, for my final Let's Play, I'm actually gonna do that. I'm gonna take Jacqueline, I'm gonna take her out of being just a carbon copy of Ivory, and I'm gonna, you know, improve her. I'm gonna give her moves that she does, give her finishers that she does, and actually change her moveset around. So you actually can find the edits I made to her moveset in the description below if you're interested in doing the same. I used to do this all the time back in the day when I played No Mercy, most notably with someone like Kurt Angle, you know, giving him the ankle lock. Creating an alternate version of The Undertaker so that he can have his Tombstone Piledriver as his finisher, because this game doesn't have super specials like it did in Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, and that would be very useful for Undertaker. Changing up people like Taz a little bit, giving them a slightly more variations of suplexes and things like that. So I had a lot of fun playing this Let's Play. It's a very short, the Women's Championship path is only 5 matches, and I have to lose the first match actually, so you won't see me do much in action. Here I go, right out the gate, attacking Terry Runnels with a flying head scissors, which is a move I had to change. And I also changed a few other things like the movement and taunts and things like that. But again, you can find that in the description below. But as for the rest of this Let's Play, you know, I'm going to give kind of an overview of Jackie's career in WWE, the historical context, if you will, of what was going on around the time, you know, this game came out. But with a lot of the other women that I did in this Let's Play, I kind of go above and beyond sort of before, you know, the 2000s and after the 2000s, because, you know, the women in WWE at the time, they weren't really given a lot of the limelight, you know, like they are now, with the multiple women's championships, you know, with all the inaugural things they're doing with the women in WWE. You know, back then, the Attitude Era was a lot different. A lot of the women, they would just showcase for, you know, sex and, you know, being a physical attraction as opposed to actually being highlighted for their ability in the ring. And Jacqueline was one of the women who had a lot of ability in the ring. She started, you know, she's from Dallas, Texas. She was trained by Skandor Akbar, and she began wrestling in 1988. And her early days of wrestling was in a promotion called the USWA, where she was known as Miss Texas. She even wrestled briefly for FMW, I found out while doing research for this video, very early on. So like, you can't get tougher than wrestling in FMW. As a woman in Japan wrestling for FMW, that's crazy. That's so awesome. Her first actual nickname was Sweet Georgia Brown, and then she became Miss Texas, and she had a seemingly great run in USWA. I couldn't find a lot of footage on it on YouTube or Daily Motion. There's quite a few promos and things like that out there, but she was the first ever women's champion in that promotion, and she won the title a total of 14 times, which is crazy. That's a lot of times to win one championship, and it's the most reigns obviously for that championship. At the time, around the 90s, the WWF had a partnership with USWA where they exchanged talent Most notably, this is how Jerry Lawler first came into the promotion in WWF. And Jacqueline was actually set to debut in WWF around 93-94 as a manager for Jeff Jarrett. But the plans fell through, and Jacqueline would end up going to WCW. She would eventually appear as a manager / love interest to Kevin Sullivan, which is the first time I remember seeing her. She was involved with that whole feud with Kevin Sullivan and Benoit over Sullivan's wife Nancy, who was known as a woman in WCW, which went from an infamous worked angle of Nancy leaving Sullivan for Benoit to a real-life story of Nancy leaving Sullivan for Benoit. I've talked about Benoit a lot on this channel in my previous Let's Plays, and I'm pretty sure I've covered that, the whole Benoit-Sullivan angle in either my WCW Let's Play of Benoit or my previous WWF No Mercy Let's Plays with Benoit, so go check those out. Can't remember, it's been so long ago when I did the Benoit ones. But Jacqueline was presented as Sullivan's manager, but was also, like, you know, kind of his love interest as well as his, like, muscle. Like, she was frequently involved with her matches, and, you know, her character was portrayed as someone who can wrestle the guys, even though she didn't do a whole lot of that in WCW, but in USWA she definitely did. And she was presented as this tough, physical competitor, and she would frequently interfere in his matches. Even when the matches with Benoit, they'd be kind of like handicap matches because Jacqueline would be beating up Benoit while Sullivan was beating up Benoit. At Super Brawl 7, she was tied up with Woman, and they fought while Benoit and Sullivan fought, and she was involved with, like, the table spot at the end. At Bash at the Beach 97, like I said, it was basically like a handicap match with Jacqueline beating up on Benoit, but she would leave Sullivan in that match. She would abandon him because she was tired of the way he was treating her, and that, you know, Sullivan would go on to lose the match. You know, she was 5'3", and there was always, as far as I can remember, you know, this thing about her character where she wasn't afraid to fight with men, and that's what always sort of attracted me to Jacqueline, you know. And it was rarely presented at that time in WCW, and especially just in the States in general, women who can fight with men. You know, I feel like Chyna, and I've talked about it in her Let's Play, Chyna was really the first woman to be presented on a grand scale in the States to be competitive with the men, but Jacqueline was kind of doing it before that, although maybe not at, like, the highest level in terms of, like, promotion, you know what I mean? Like, she wasn't being promoted as, like, a main event caliber women against men, as opposed, like, Chyna was. But Jacqueline was kind of doing it first. She was already wrestling for 9 years when she was in WCW, and she only ever got 2 matches in WCW because they didn't have a women's division. But they were notable because she wrestled against Disco Inferno at Halloween Havoc 97, and then following that on an episode of Nitro. Disco Inferno was the TV champion at the time, but it was a non-title match, and Jacqueline beat him, I should say, beat her. A little Freudian slip for Disco Inferno there, at Halloween Havoc, and then would face Disco again the following week. But would lose, of course, because Disco would cheat in a way to win, which would become a recurring theme. Every time Jacqueline faced men in the ring, they would always have to cheat to beat her. They could never beat her fair and square, which is, I think, very funny, but also, like, highlighting, like, how much they really protected this character of Jacqueline, who was tough. And don't get me wrong, like, honestly, like, back in the day, I wouldn't pick a fight with Jacqueline. She would kick my butt. You know what I mean? Like, she was always, it was very authentic because, again, she could wrestle. She had years and years of wrestling experience under her belt. And when she finally came over to WWE, she made her debut in 1998. She was presented as the then new girlfriend of Mark Merrill, sort of similar to the Kevin Sullivan thing, where Mark Merrill and Sable, who was his actual wife, they had a falling out on screen, and Jacqueline was kind of brought in as the new woman. And again, WWE at the time, she wasn't brought in to build up a women's division. She was brought in to sort of feud with Sable, so Sable can have someone to feud with. But a lot of it was, you know, around sex. It wasn't really around wrestling. I guess I do need to talk about Sable for a little bit. She was part of this whole other women's revolution that was happening in WWE at the time, where it was just about TNA and puppies and all this stuff. And the Attitude Era pushed a lot of boundaries on things, and sex was one of them. And Sable was at the beginning of that, and was at the center of that, I feel like. She wasn't really the beginning of it, but she was at the center of it. And that's what kind of set the standard for WWE for a long time for the women there. They're making a lot of strides now in terms of treating the women like they should be treated in terms of actual athletes and competitors, but it was a lot different in the Attitude Era. And I look back on it, and it's cringeworthy when I look back on it. And even growing up watching it, I was way more interested in wanting to see the women wrestle, because as I talked about in my Alundra Blaze Let's Play, that was my first introduction to women being in the ring, was seeing Alundra Blaze going in there against Bull Nakano and doing these German suplexes. I thought that was awesome. And then here we are, flash forward years later, and you got Sable and Jacqueline at Fully Loaded 1998, which was Jacqueline's first pay-per-view appearance, by the way, having a bikini contest. It's the infamous bikini contest where Sable had the painted on handprints, and it's like that was Jacqueline's first pay-per-view appearance. Okay, she had almost a decade of wrestling experience by that point, known to get in the ring with men and wrestle men in USWA, having very brief wrestling appearances in WCW, but mostly competing with the men. And then here she is, and she's, they want her to parade her around in a bikini. It's very upsetting, honestly, to go back and look at. And, now WWE is trying to change that. And I'm glad they're trying to change that, but it's hard to forget this stuff happened, especially when you have the WWE Network to go to. But after the bikini contest at Fully Loaded, the Women's Championship was revived, and it was decided in a match between Jacqueline and Sable on an episode of Raw. The last time we saw the Women's Championship in WWE was with Alundra Blaze, which again I talked about in my last Let's Play. And she wrestled her last match in November of '95, was released shortly thereafter, and appeared on the December 18th episode of Nitro, where she infamously dumped the title in the trash. Jim Cornette is on commentary for this match with Sable and Jacqueline, and she actually acknowledges Alundra Blaze being the last women's champion, saying the title was vacated. It's a very, very short match, and there is no women's championship belt to be seen, which I found shocking. I did not realize this. I had to go back and watch the match because I didn't remember that this was a thing, that this was how they brought the title back. Jacqueline just celebrates with Meryl. She wins. She becomes the women's champion, but there's no title, no championship belt. We don't see it until their next match at Survivor Series 1998. Which was about a month or so later from this match. And Jacqueline actually kind of had title defenses of her women's championship in her first reign. They were mostly on Sunday Night Heat and Shotgun, but there was still no title. She would finally come out with the title at Survivor Series 98. So that's another thing to take in consideration with Jacqueline. She was the first woman to hold the women's championship from this era. This is the post Alundra Blaze era. This is them attempting to restart the women's division, but she would lose to Sable at Survivor Series, and she would have one more pay-per-view match against Sable at the following pay-per-view in a mixed tag match with Jacqueline and Meryl against Sable and Christian, and she also had a mixed tag match at SummerSlam, which saw the debut of Edge teaming up with Sable. So Sable teamed with both Edge and Christian before they were a thing. I think that's kind of funny. But after her feud with Sable ended, Jacqueline left Meryl, formed an alliance with Terry Runnels called Pretty Mean Sisters, or PMS. The less said about PMS, the better, honestly, because again, most of the storylines were all very lowbrow humor, revolving around immature depictions of women, in this case Terry and Jacqueline being sex obsessed with the male wrestlers and forcing them to be their sex slaves, such as D'Lo, Val Venus, Mark Henry, Sean Stasiak, who would actually become an official member of the group. PMS is represented in WrestleMania 2000, which is kind of funny, especially because Sean Stasiak is in that game and he's part of PMS. And what I always thought was kind of funny, or weird, not really funny, but weird and kind of bothered me, was that they have the music that they used for Jacqueline and Terry at that time. And in No Mercy, they don't have that music. She comes out in like very generic music, and I don't like a lot of the custom music in this. I've talked about that in the past. The No Mercy music kind of bothers me in comparison to the other Aki games. And I always thought, like, why didn't they carry that over? That was the music that Jacqueline would use pretty much for the rest of her career. She would use that music that she first started using when they formed that group, Pretty Mean Sisters. So I don't know what's up with that, as Hurricane Helms would say. Like, why did they take out the music? But PMS was lame, honestly. And again, Jacqueline got really the short end of the stick because we don't see her wrestling, but participating in these storylines revolving around really bad jokes and scenarios. And the Women's Championship wasn't doing much better when Sable won it. We wouldn't see Jacqueline challenge for the title until Rebellion of 1999, when she was involved in a Four Corners match that also featured Luna, Tori, and now Women's Champion Ivory. And I've talked about Ivory's runs as champion in her Let's Play. But this was Jacqueline's first pay-per-view match since the tag match at Capital Carnage, which was 10 months previous. Okay, the first women's champion has a pay-per-view match, has another one, and then is gone from pay-per-view for 10 months. We don't see her on pay-per-view. This would kind of sadly become a recurring theme for Jacqueline. She would be at the next Survivor Series after Rebellion, and it would be a 4v4 tag one fall sudden death match featuring Deborah, Mae Young, Moolah, and Tori beating Ivory, Jacqueline, Luna, and Terry. The match lasted less than 2 minutes. Again, another recurring theme for the Attitude Era women. All these matches, even if they were on pay-per-view, were less than 5 minutes, sometimes less than 3 minutes, 2 minutes. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about. She'll be part of another 4-way women's championship match at the next pay-per-view, Armageddon, but it was an evening gown match, which ended up lasting longer than the Survivor Series match for some reason. It was like 3 minutes. Miss Kitty, who's in the ring right now, Kat, would become the champion, defeating BB and Ivory and Jacqueline. Ivory was the champion. So you have Ivory and Jacqueline, who are like legit wrestlers who have years of experience. I've talked about Ivory in her Let's Play. Jacqueline, one of the best women they had at the time, with, you know, it was basically Jacqueline and Ivory, honestly. That's who they had. And Luna Vachon as well. But you got BB and Miss Kitty getting all the limelight. And why? Is because, you know, TNA. WWE was doing TNA before TNA Impact showed up. That's really what happened. So I actually made a fantasy booking episode with WrestleMania 2000 for WrestleMania 15, where instead of Sable defending the Women's Championship against Tori, I had Jacqueline remain the champion until Mania and defend it against Ivory, so that these two Hall of Famers, these great women, could actually have had a WrestleMania moment to look back on in this fantasy world. And also because since Jacqueline's arrival in 1998, her and Ivory were the only two women in the division that could actually be taken seriously as wrestlers. You know, most of the women had little to no wrestling experience and didn't really want to wrestle, like Sable, Kat, BB, etc. Armageddon 1999 would be her last pay-per-view until Survivor Series 2001, and this is what I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, you know, where I was going to go a little bit more around what was happening in 2000, because Jacqueline did not wrestle on a pay-per-view in all of 2000, which is crazy to me, because it was in the year 2000 where she would win her second women's championship. She won it on an episode of SmackDown, which aired on February 3rd, 2000, by defeating Hervina in less than 20 seconds. Who is Hervina? Hervina was Harvey Whippleman in disguise. Harvey Whippleman, who's that? He was a comedy character manager who primarily appeared in the 90s. I remember Harvey Whippleman. He used to come out, he used to dress like in a suit, kind of like nerdy looking. He managed a lot of heels like Sid, Kamala, Warlord, Giant Gonzalez. He also managed former women's champion Bertha Faye, and I've talked about Bertha Faye, my Alundra Blaze Let's Play, in a very comedic angle. Whippleman, for no apparent reason, was disguised as a woman and participated in this Lumberjill Snow Bunny match, okay, against Kat, and he won. And the Lumberjill match was, there was a sort of like a pool, not even in the ring, just like on the side, outside by the Titantron, where all this fake snow and all the women standing around like a lumberjack match, threw fake snowballs at Harvey Whippleman and Kat while they quote-unquote wrestled. Attitude Era, everyone. This is it. This is the prime. This is what people forget about. But Jacqueline would become champion because of this. She would face Harvey Whippleman the next night and beat him, and becomes 2-time women's champion. She would hold the title for about 2 months, which is still slightly shorter than her first reign. But she would defend the title a couple of times on episodes of Raw and SmackDown, primarily feuding with Ivory, sometimes Luna. She would lose the title on an episode of SmackDown, which aired on March 30, 2000, against Stephanie McMahon. This was the beginning of Stephanie McMahon's women's championship run during the McMahon-Helmsley era. It was Stephanie's first ever match. Okay, again, non-wrestler. It was all storyline, obviously, to get the power play of the McMahon-Helmsley era. I get that. But, you know, they had all of DX involved. X-Pac, Tori, Triple H was distracting the ref. X-Pac came in and did something. You know, he pulled her leg, and then Tori came in, hit her with DDT. I believe that's how it went down. I kind of forget. And then Stephanie just went for the pin. So they had to cheat to beat her. Again, recurring theme. You have to cheat to beat Jacqueline. Can't beat her fair and square. Because she's and that's something that they actually would always highlight. They would always highlight, even when Jacqueline was in sort of these absurd situations, they always highlighted that, you know, Jacqueline's tough. She's one of the best. You can't beat her easy. And at least they sort of protected that a little bit. They didn't give her a lot of time to shine. They didn't give her long matches. They didn't give her main event status on pay-per-views. But at least every time they came out, JR was always talking about how credible of an athlete, how credible of a wrestler Jacqueline was. So that was always nice to hear. And then, of course, Jerry Lawler would say something, and it's just like, come on, Jerry Lawler, what are you doing? But that would be Jacqueline's final women's championship run ever in WWE, you know, losing to Stephanie McMahon. It would be a few months before we saw Jacqueline in the ring again, too. But her next feud was kind of interesting. She started feuding with Dean Malenko, and this was the first time WWE really started to embrace Jacqueline's character as fighting men in the ring, which is what they always talked about and hinted at, and we didn't really see a lot of until this moment, where she would challenge Malenko. She actually challenged Malenko for his light heavyweight title on an episode of Sunday Night Heat, and then on the following episode of SmackDown, she would lose, but on the following episode of SmackDown, her and Ivory would be in a handicap match against Dean Malenko. These matches are very fun, and you go back and you watch them, and yeah, you know, Dean Malenko, even though he himself was a light heavyweight, he outsizes Jacqueline. But again, Jacqueline is so believable. She's so tough in the ring. She's so good in the ring that it made the matches, as short as they were, very entertaining. And that feud was pretty entertaining as well. You know, after feuding with Malenko, though, she was inserted back into the women's division, feuding with new champion Lita, who I've talked about in my previous Let's Plays as well, having a series of matches with her throughout the reign. She would be involved in a Four Corners match on SmackDown. You know, just a lot of that. A lot of appearing here on Raw, appearing here on SmackDown. One thing to note, though, is like during Ivory's reign around this time, after Lita dropped the belt, and Ivory leading up to her feud with Chyna, Ivory and Jacqueline began to feud, and Jacqueline always teamed up with APA. Wouldn't it have been cool if Jacqueline became a member of APA? Because again, like, she was so tough, and like to always see her beat up the guys, like imagine if she came in and she was part of APA, playing poker and drinking and smoking cigars with Bradshaw and Farouk. That would have been really fun, I think. She was sort of a non-official member, I like to think, of APA, because she did a lot of six-person tag team matches with them. But she didn't appear, like I said before, she didn't appear at pay-per-view at all in 2000. Her next pay-per-view appearance would be Survivor Series 2001. Her appearances in 2001 will also be sort of sporadic, but around this time she was actually part of the Tough Enough show. She was one of the first trainers on Tough Enough. Fun fact, ODB, four-time women's champion in Impact, tried out for Tough Enough that first year, didn't make it to the final round, but later on Jacqueline and ODB would have a bunch of matches in Impact, so I thought that was kind of interesting. Survivor Series 2001 saw Jazz in a six-pack challenge. I'm sorry, Jazz would see Jacqueline in a six-pack challenge with Trish, Ivory, and the debuting Jazz, is what I meant to say, Lita and Mighty Molly. This was when the women's title was vacant after Chyna left WWE, and, you know, Trish would win here. But this was like the core. Trish, Ivory, Jazz, Lita, Mighty Molly, you know, Molly Holly, and Jacqueline. This was the core you could have built the women's division around. And I've talked about this, you know, and then later on you would get Victoria, Gail Kim. Like, you could have kept adding to it. And they really didn't. They really didn't. You know, they highlighted Trish, they highlighted Lita, but they were always in the background compared to what was going on in the rest of WWE with the men. And, you know, Stephanie McMahon mostly got all the big storylines when it came to the women being presented. But not these, you know, not these great wrestlers who really were all really good. I enjoyed every single one of them, especially going back during this Let's Play and watching matches of everyone again. They really were. It's unfortunate. I think it all had to do with timing. It had all to do with timing, and I think if Jacqueline, you know, debuted now, she'd be right up there with everyone else, you know. Again, a lot of Sunday Night Heat appearances for 2002. Her next pay-per-view appearance in 2002, though, would be Insurrection, May of 2002, a tag team match with Jacqueline, Trish, against Jazz and Molly Holly. Watch this match if you really want to get a sense of what I'm talking about, of what could have been. This was a very fun, solid, hard-hitting match between the four women. Great tag team match, great spots. You know, it wasn't long on time, but like they delivered in what they were given. And again, you could have built a whole division around them. And they always did like sort of a stop and start with them, and they never really committed to them. And eventually they would go and do the whole Divas thing, you know. In December of 2002, we would see her be in another intergender match with Steven Richards. This was to build up her feud with Victoria happening at the time. And Richards would get the win, of course, through nefarious means. And that would lead into the pay-per-view triple threat between Trish, Jacqueline, and Victoria, where Victoria would retain her title. After that, we would see Jacqueline again at Judgment Day in a fatal four-way where Jazz, who's the champion now, defeated Jacqueline, Trish, and Victoria. Another fun four-way match. Pretty good. I would highly recommend watching that as well. And that would be the last pay-per-view appearance for Jacqueline for another year until Judgment Day 2004, where we would see her face Chavo Guerrero Jr. And if you don't remember this feud, Chavo Guerrero Jr. 2 weeks before came out, issued an open challenge to anyone in the back, and Jacqueline came out, beat him for the Cruiserweight Champion, becoming Cruiserweight Champion, one of technically 3 women who have held that title, because that was the WCW Cruiserweight Championship, and the WCW Medusa and Daphne held that title. Although again, it wasn't, you know, it was all storyline and stuff like that. Even though Medusa's great and Daphne's great, the way they won the titles wasn't really all that noteworthy. But she was the first and only woman in WWE to hold that championship while it was under the WWE banner. And part of, again, a small group of women in WWE who have held championships that weren't women's championships. Chyna with the Intercontinental Championship, Trish, Molly, and a few others with the Hardcore Championship, and Jacqueline with the Cruiserweight Championship. So that's really cool. And that, but unfortunately, that was her last hurrah in WWE. She would lose the title back to Chavo again through nefarious means. Chavo was supposed to wrestle with one arm tied around his back. He did it. He cheated to win, as a Guerrero would do, and with the help of Chavo Classic, and get the title back from Jacqueline. And that was it. That was Jacqueline's career in WWE, pretty much. You know, she would lead. That was her last match in WWE. She would go on to wrestle for Impact Wrestling, making appearances from 2004 to 2013. But really, it was 2007 and 2008 where you saw her wrestle the most. She had a pretty good run, never captured the Impact Wrestling Women's Championship, which was called the Knockouts Division Championship. But she was involved in the first gauntlet match for the title that saw Gail Kim win. She feuded with Gail Kim. They had a first ever women's cage match in Impact Wrestling. She was in a bunch of hardcore matches. She managed Beer Money, James Storm, and Bobby Roode. So she had a pretty good run in Impact. And then, of course, being inducted into the Hall of Fame 2016, showing up at the Women's Royal Rumble, Yeah, I do think that she has despite, you know, her missing out on a lot of stuff, I think Jacqueline has had a Hall of Fame worthy career. I'm glad that she did get inducted in. Again, much like many of the women in this Let's Play that I've talked about, I feel like it was all about, you know, right place, sort of wrong time. And a lot of the women who have been inducted from this era definitely deserve to be inducted, because it's almost the kind of thing, it's like, what could have been? There could have been so much more already with what they had accomplished. And Jacqueline, I feel like, is one of them. So I hope I did her justice in this Let's Play, going over sort of her greatest hits, as well as highlighting a lot of the missteps that I think WWE took in handling Jacqueline. But here you go. I'm going to go back and show you now my women's championship is complete. Once again, if you want to see how I changed her moves around, if you were watching the gameplay of and thought, man, you know, I liked how he gave her the tornado DDT and the jumping DDT and all that stuff, you can check in the description below. I have one more championship path to do. That is the World Heavyweight Championship path. Finally, I'm getting to it. I'm getting to the World Heavyweight Championship. The women is all done. I stream this game on twitch.tv/BeBetterGamer, as well as other games like Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, other Aki games. So you can check that out. You can follow me, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Be Better Gamer. Check out some of my other No Mercy Let's Play episodes, my Women's Championship, and maybe my No Mercy Cause if you like this video. Thanks again for watching. I am Be Better Gamer. Until next time, keep watching all the wrestling.